Hello and welcome to a Study in Truth podcast. I'm Luke and this is Mitchell, and today we're talking about the question, what is truth? I guess the text that would be good to start in is in John 18 and verse 38. Pilate is standing before the truth himself, and in John 18 and verse 38, Pilate asks a very important question that I think a lot of people today are asking, and it's in John chapter 8 and verse 38. And we would encourage you, if you have a Bible out there and you're listening, feel free to open up and look at it with us. It says in verse 38, Pilate said to him, "What is truth?" And when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, "I find no fault in them." That's a very important question that Pilate asks. A lot of people debate on what that means. What do you think what do you think the reason is he asked that question?
It was probably getting at more of like a who are we to decide what's true kind of thing. Like what I think is true might be not what you think is true, and that kind of ideology. That
makes sense. I think that's what a lot of people get at. Others think he's actually sincerely asking what is truth. But just by that attitude he has the whole time, I don't think he's really concerned about it.
Yeah, probably not.
He looks more like he's concerned about pleasing the Jews and pleasing Caesar. Because I think at one point they say, hey, he's threatening to be king. He might overthrow Rome. And they're like, oh, no, we don't want to have any of that. So
probably just wants to go home and not deal with this, honestly.
Yeah.
So he's just trying to pacify and like try to find the right way out of this.
Yeah.
Just to kind of get it done with.
Yeah, I think that's true. So I think the question he asks, what is truth? I want to start with that word truth. It's the Greek word aletheia. I've looked up a lot of dictionaries, Greek dictionaries, and it means typically objective or what is true in any matter under consideration. In other words, an absolute fact or an absolute moral or whatever it may be. So when he asks what is aletheia, he is, in other words, asking what is absolute truth? What is, what's the word I'm looking for? Objective truth.
And a little philosophical up there, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. So that's kind of what we're going to base on that word aletheia being objective or something that is absolute. If you look at the Roman society back then, it was it was founded upon relative truth. There's really two major views when it comes to truth. If you look at them, there's absolute truth and then there is relative truth. Absolute being there's something set, there's something standard that's above mankind, and relative truth obviously is relative to a society or relative to an individual. And in his society, I've sent you the video, the Francis Schaeffer video. Yeah. He has a video series called How Should We Then Live? And in these videos, he talks about Roman history and how that their truth was based upon human gods. That is, human gods that were finite. Talks about these guys, how they would die, they would have a lot of failures. And when you think about truth in their day, it was relative because, I mean, these were gods they made, something that they come up with out of their own desires.
Stuff that they observe and see, and they're like, well, that's a physical thing, so that must be a god for that.
Yeah, and so anything that they believed to be true, it was ultimately, when you think about it, based upon what they felt or what they thought, not anything above them. And so you think about Rome and their kingdom and their power. What did Daniel prophesy about Rome? Do you remember anything? What was it specific that would happen to them? We'll actually look at it.
Yeah,
let's look at it. That might actually be better.
I don't know off the top of my head. I know the whole statue.
Probably should have put it in my notes. I have it in my sermon PowerPoint for this Sunday, so you get to hear it twice if you're here Sunday evening.
All right.
So it's in Daniel chapter 2. There's an interesting prophecy about the kingdom of Rome. I can't talk today, so you have to excuse me. In Daniel chapter 2.
Was it the one of dirt and clay?
Yes, that's what I was looking for.
The feet.
Where is it? Chapter 2 and verse number 42. He's prophesying of this kingdom, this fourth kingdom that's going to come. He's already talked about Babylon. He's already talked about the Medes and Persians, the Greeks, and he gets to this kingdom and said, as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. Now, what Francis Schaeffer does in that video is talks about the reason why they were fragile is because they didn't have absolutes. They didn't have a standard to look at that was going to be objective. In other words, they kind of just went about it their own way. Yeah. And I think that makes a lot of sense when you think about Rome falling. It was because they didn't have something to look to govern their way of living.
I kind of took it as more like, like you think of Rome, right? You think of their very strong army. They conquered all sorts of things. They were the largest kingdom that you really saw. There was nothing like it.
Yeah.
But then you also see the other side of it where they were morally weak. Like they just had all sorts of like strong military force, but then they just kind of had this kind of subjective morality to it.
Yeah.
And that any society with that's probably doomed to fail.
That makes sense. And that's kind of where I want to take it now. Well, first I want to mention Christians. They hated Christianity. And Francis Schaeffer talks about this. I don't think they hated Christians because they love Jesus or they serve Jesus. That wasn't it. I think it was, we have an absolute. We say no to any other gods out there, any false gods, any idols. We have an absolute. And I think that's why Rome probably hated Christianity. But it's kind of funny. I don't mean to be joking about this, but where's the Roman kingdom today? I mean, it's...
Hey, you got the Pope there now, so
yeah, I guess so. I guess they still have some sort of kingdom,
events,
right?
Huh?
Yeah, but the empire, it fell. Eventually, the Roman Empire fell.
Oh, yeah.
But you got Christ, and he's still here today. And
I think that will never be broken.
And I think the reason why is because it's founded upon absolute truth. Jesus says in Matthew 16:18, he was going to build his church upon the confession of the Son of God, and that the gates of hell would not prevail against it. And you see Christianity lasting throughout any empire, any kingdom that goes and tries to establish its truths on relativeness or any kind of human agency. It's not going to last. I think about Nazi Germany, something very recent to our history. They had relative truth. It was based upon something that they thought was right, and they fell. And I think this is really good arguments for the existence of Christianity. Just if you look at kingdoms and what they found their beliefs on, if it's going to be human truths, anything that's non-Christian related, it's not going to last. It's eventually going to fall.
Yeah, because I mean, we're flawed. Anything that we come up with apart from like some sort of absolute goodness is not going to be ultimately good.
That's really true. That is really true. And I want to look at one more text before we move forward. And then Matthew chapter 7 and verse number, where is it? Verse number 24 through 27. Jesus says this, "Therefore, whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them, I will liken him to a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and beat on that house, and it did not fall, for it was founded on the rock." But he says in verse 26, "But everyone who hears these sayings of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand, and the rain descended, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, and it fell, and great was its fall." And I think the point
that, a song about that.
I know that should be a good song. I think there is, right? I think what the point that Jesus is making is, if you want to know Christianity is true, see how long it lasts. I mean, test it. I don't think that's what he's getting at ultimately. I mean, the point is follow me, but I think we can prove from Christianity just how long it'll outlast anything that there is.
And if we even go back to that last passage we were in Daniel, the very next verse, let me see. It was, what was it? Daniel. It was, Daniel 2:43?
I think
right?
so, yeah.
Yeah. Where was it? Partly strong.
I know 42 is what I looked at.
Oh, yeah, 44.
Okay.
In the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. The kingdom shall not be left to other people, shall break into pieces, consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. I mean, that says it all right there.
That says it all. I mean, it's going to outlast anything. So if you're looking for something that's going to last, look to Christianity. Now I want to talk about society today. We looked at the Roman society and how that it fell because it wasn't founded upon anything absolute. And we think about how society is going today. I did a survey. This was kind of interesting to look at what most people think about truth. I looked at one survey in 2001. a survey of 1,010 adults, it said that 64% of American adults believe truth is relative to the person or their situation In 2015, 1,000 adults were surveyed, and it said 57% of American adults do not believe in absolute truth. And then finally, in 2020, there was a survey of 2,000 adults. 58% of those adults believe that truth is relative to an individual's desires. Now, that's pretty much telling me that over half of the world, or at least the majority of people, think that truth is relative. Mm-hmm. I think we live in a pretty similar society to Rome. I mean, we're not maybe as wicked as Rome yet, but
not yet.
We're not completely there. But I'm seeing this pattern of most people believing that it's all true to self. And I think what we can learn from the past is we need to get founded upon Christ, upon that rock, upon that absolute, or we're not going to last. I mean, America, if it keeps going the way it's going, and it just keeps on founding it upon human wisdom, human knowledge, human doctrine, it's not going to last. And I think we can learn that from history very easily. I think about I guess what would you say the world power right now that's not looking so good? Russia. I mean, you think about, I think if I'm not mistaken,
and China.
Yeah, they're still founded upon communism, aren't they? A little bit.
What, China?
Yeah.
They say they're not, but they are.
Yeah. And Russia too. Yeah.
And Russia. Yeah.
And it's all human wisdom. It's all human truth. And if they're not careful, they're going to be like Rome. If we're not careful, we're going to be like Rome. And I think that's something that we can learn as a society is we need to have an absolute. Now, where we find that absolute, that's the next question that we're going to ask in just a moment. But I think I want to take a look at implications of relative truth. Mitchell, what do you think is an implication of relative truth? If it's relative to an individual, what does that mean?
Well, then you get back to the kind of monstrosities that you saw in World War II. You get to kind of the things that we're seeing today, where if one individual or even just like a group of individuals base all morality on what they think and what they believe, then really, if they mess up somewhere, then that becomes a moral standard of something that's flawed and not good. Like, I mean, you saw it with the Nazis back then, with Hitler's ideology of the ethnic cleansing, the genocides, and not to mention the other things.
Yeah.
But then you also see it today where you have those pushing for abortion. You see these awful things like the abortion. And like we mentioned, China, the genocides happening in China. You get these these really flawed moral codes that whenever they're based upon people, you just kind of have, I think this and I think this. And well, who are you to say I can't think this?
Dropped my Bible while you were talking there. I'm sorry. Yeah, no, that is true. It kind of gets confusing. I try to tell people when I'm talking to them about this fact that if we base it upon just ourselves, it's kind of just, well, first of all, you see flaws, and also you see a lot of confusion. I think one of the most profound statements I've ever heard about this was Charles Darwin. It's in his autobiography, page 94. If I don't have the link, I will be sure to share it at some point if I post this online, which I am, I'll put it on there. But notice this quote. This was Charles Darwin. A man who has no assured or ever present belief in the existence of a personal God or of a future existence with retribution and reward can have for his rule of life, as far as I can see, only to follow those impulses and instincts which are strongest or which seem to him the best ones. So what Charles Darwin is ultimately saying is, you think about Adolf Hitler. His strongest instinct was to kill the Jews. Let's take out an entire population. If Charles Darwin is right, technically speaking, wouldn't that make Adolf Hitler right? I mean, if there was no God, right?
Make him at least self-righteous there.
Yeah.
I mean, like he would have like a foot to stand on and saying like, well, this is what I think. This is what I would enjoy. So it's right for me to do this.
And who would I be to judge him for that, right? I can't.
Exactly.
I'm no different than him. I think he should not kill them. He thinks he should, but neither of us would be absolutely right. I mean, technically speaking.
Yep.
And he talks about impulses, and this makes me think. I've been reading C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity, and man,
Good book.
Brilliant guy. I mean, I know he was wrong in some things, but man, as far as philosophy,
Yeah.
you can't beat him. And he talks about impulses, and he talks about the difference between moral law and impulses. And he says a lot of people are going to make this argument that, well, isn't moral law in ourselves? Isn't it the desires we have? Isn't it the instincts that we come with? And he talks about how that moral law is separate from instincts.
Mhm.
He kind of uses it in an example of a piano. He says our instincts are the keys, but the sheet music is the moral law. It's different.
that.
It's governing our instincts and impulses. And he says usually if we follow the stronger impulses, we're probably going to do something evil. I mean, I think about you think about a man, you see him drowning, and you're thinking, well, this strong impulse tells me don't save him because I could die. The weaker impulse, usually, I mean, I would probably feel weaker to save him. I know I should, but at the same time, I'm like, man, I don't want to drown. Well, which impulse should I follow? If I should follow the strong one, I may follow that one, just leave him alone.
Mhm.
And that's the point that he talks about. So if Charles Darwin is right, really, if you want to murder, go murder. If you want to rape, go rape. That's what he's telling us ultimately. Yeah.
Hedonism is what it is.
And I don't think most people believe that. I think most people would agree that Adolf Hitler, Jeffrey Dahmer did wrong. Men like him. Actually, he has on record saying, Jeffrey Dahmer, that he didn't believe in God. And he thought, well, if there's no judgment, I can do what I want.
Yeah.
And I mean, really, that these men don't realize the implications of their beliefs. And we've already talked about, I'm going through my notes here. We've already talked about truth being relative to an individual. A lot of people think it's relative to a society, but then you've got a problem of which one is right.
Yeah. Because like you see all these kind of like tribes that are like uncontacted. There's like cannibalism, like that's a normal thing. That's like, if you just kind of go by what the majority in a certain demographic says is right, then you kind of come up with the same exact ideology that kind of gives birth to these horrible things.
Yeah, that's true. And I've been told this before. I was asking somebody about Nazi Germany, and I was like, hey, so like about moral truth and about absolutes, like, is what they did wrong? And he goes, yeah. And I said, well, if truth lies within ourselves and it's all about what we say, how can you judge what they did wrong? And his argument was they didn't have the right information yet. Like Nazi Germany didn't know what they were doing was wrong. And I'm thinking, you've got to know what, I mean, we had the Bible way before Nazi Germany came into power. All they had to do was open up a Bible and read it. The world around them knew this was wrong. I am sure Adolf Hitler had people tell him this is wrong. Yeah. I mean, there was no way.
Killed them too.
I would say so. It's like, I'm going to kill you for that. Yeah.
But then, hey, they tried to enforce their subjective truth on his subjective truth.
Yeah.
And then you just get that clash where it's like, okay, I don't like what you said. I'm going to shut you up or kill you. Yeah.
And nobody would be wrong if there was no God. And I think the point that we're trying to drive at, if you're listening out there and you don't believe in God, is I think one of the proofs of the existence of God is the fact that there is absolute truth. We'll get to that in just a moment, but the point we're making from Nazi Germany is simply that if truth is relative, if there is no absolute truth, then we can't judge these people. The Nuremberg trials, they were wrong for judging them if relative truth exists.
Something I wanted to touch on was, I've been thinking about this, like a big argument that like atheists or people who like kind of do believe in some sort of subjective morality is that, well, what is objective morality is that whatever is good for the common man or for society as a whole or just for humanity, right? Whatever the net positive is. And they kind of use that as a cop-out to say like, oh, we don't need a God to tell us that because, I mean, it's common sense what's good for my neighbor. But then you get right back to that same exact issue of, okay, what do you think is good for your neighbor?
Yeah.
Because Hitler thought what was great for the world was to kill all of the Jews. And then you're right back to square one whenever you kind of get at that, well, whatever's good for society. Well, who decides what's good for society?
Exactly.
Like you have to have that standard that's higher than humans.
Yeah, exactly. If not, then it's going to be chaotic.
Yeah.
This made me think of an argument that Kyle Butt did with Dan Barker. He was saying, let's say that aliens are coming down and they're going to threaten the entire human race unless you rape one woman. And he says, would you do it?
What a hypothetical.
Would you do it? And he says, well, answer the question. So he answered, he says, well, yes, if it was good. But he kept adding to it. What about a million women? What about, and he kept saying yes. And that just kind of shows the weakness of atheism, or just the belief that there is no absolute truth. Absolute truth says no, don't even rape one. That's wrong. And but relative truth says, well, really, is there a limit? I mean, that would be. I made this analogy up in myself, but I think it makes sense. I might put it on the video. So if you're watching the video form of this, you might see my terrible art. Maybe not. But it's kind of like a car. Car's driving down the road. The situation is the guy's running late for work. And he's running late. The boss is like, you need to be here on time. And he's just running late. And I don't know. You can make up any reason why he's running late. But there's the speed limit sign, says 35 miles an hour. Now, he has two impulses. Impulse one, I'm going to speed. I think I should speed to get to work on time. Impulse number two, I should probably go the speed limit. But then moral law is that speed limit sign that says, no, this is what you should do. It doesn't matter your situation. This is what impulse. You should do. Yeah. And I don't think a police officer is going to take the excuse, oh, you were running late. Then fine. You know what? 60 miles an hour is okay. It doesn't matter. No, and I think even the boss in that point would say, look, I don't want you to be late, but don't break the law. Yeah. And I think that's the difference between our impulses, our desires, or what is quote unquote good for a society. We may feel this is good for a society, but we need somebody telling us this is right and this is wrong. And I think that's a peaceful way to live. Actually knowing this is right and this is wrong, not trying to guess and hope. And I think that's really true.
And there can be no disagreement if it's lined out as it is in the Bible. Yeah. I mean, like you can have, of course, you get to those doctrinal differences, but whenever it comes to actual moral law, there's really no way to twist that in the Bible. So it is an absolute truth that is absolutely understood. As long as you actually read it. Yeah. Know it.
That makes a lot of sense. And I had a thought, and it's going to come to me later, probably after this episode. It was really good, man. It was like the best thought ever.
Well, if it comes to you, just throw it in there.
Yeah, I'll throw it in there.
And fix it in post.
We'll just edit the video later. Like, hey guys, here's that point I wanted to make. This will be in the, what do you call it, the appendix?
Throw an audio appendix.
Audio appendix. Anyways, so if there is absolute truth, and there is, I like this quote. Again, C.S. Lewis, you'll probably hear me quote him a lot. He says, if the universe is not governed by an absolute goodness, then all our efforts are in the long run hopeless. And I just thought of what I was going to say, so I'm backing up just for a moment. Yes. It's a miracle. No, I'm just kidding. He made the point, and this was C.S. Lewis too. If there's no absolute truth, if there is not a set standard that exists outside of ourselves, what's the point in arguing? Yeah. Like, what's the point of debating over the existence of God and the non-existence of God? What is the point? If there is not an absolute that's saying your side's wrong, your side's right, if that doesn't exist, then what's the point of even talking about differences of opinion?
I mean, living, what are you shooting for?
Yeah, like what's the point? Yeah. And so that's the thought I had. I'm glad I remembered that. Yeah, there you go. I thought that was a good argument. Like, it was. There's no point in arguing over morals if there's not a standard. But he says if the universe is not governed by an absolute goodness, then all of our efforts are in the long run hopeless. But if it is, then we are making ourselves enemies to that goodness every day and are not in the least likely to do any better tomorrow. And so our case is hopeless again. We cannot do without it, and we cannot do with it. God is the only comfort. He is the only supreme terror, the only thing we most need and the thing we most want to hide from. He is our only possible ally, and we have made ourselves his enemies. I think that's a very deep quote, ultimately saying since we always feel this guilt, everybody feels guilt, and so we've got to do something about it. Yeah. So that takes us to our final point then. Since there is absolute truth, where do we find it? Mitchell, where can we find absolute truth?
Oh, I don't know. A little thing called the Bible.
Oh, really? What? Yeah, there's an absolute truth down here for us? What? Yeah. Okay.
A few of them. Like probably more than one.
Got any passages that come to mind?
What was it? I guess what what is it? Jesus is truth. Is that
John 14:6. Yeah.
Yeah.
I am the way, the truth, and the
I
life.
am? Yeah.
Yeah.
So is it even there's one instance of like everything Jesus said
Mhm.
is truth. So there's that. But then you also have what else was it? I guess everything else that was said even before Christ.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So like if you're out there listening and you believe in absolutes, listen to what Jesus says in John 8:32. John chapter 8 and verse number 32. Jesus is speaking to these Jews who have believed in him. And it says in verse number 32, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. So Jesus is telling you and me it is possible to actually know the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are a lot of even quote unquote Christians out there who think that you can't really know anything. You can't actually know the truth. But Jesus is standing in opposition to that and saying you can actually know it. And how do we know it? Back up to verse 31 says, he said to those who believed in him, if you abide in my word, you are my disciples indeed, and you shall know the truth. So now he tells us how to know the truth is by abiding in his word. It is actually possible to know what the truth is. If you're trying to find an absolute standard, you're not going to find it in man. You're not going to find it in a government. You're only going to find it in the Bible. It has proven over and over again, if you cling to what it says, it's going to outlast.
Yep.
The kingdom has always lasted until now. It's here. You think about the inspiration of the Bible, which is a whole other topic. If you struggle with that, we'll do another episode on that at another time. But once you get past all of that and you just read the Bible, it's going to tell you everything you need to know.
I'm sure there's many episodes to come to say, now that we've established where to find the truth, what is the truth?
Yeah, what is the truth? Exactly. And I mean, that's Jesus. Jesus says in John 14:6, I am the truth. If you want to know what's right, come to me. And I guess probably the final text I want to look at is in Acts 17:30. And I think we're doing good on time. So Acts chapter 17, beginning in verse 30, he tells us, Paul, now he's speaking to people who kind of believe really in relative truth. They don't really, these are people at Athens. They have all kinds of gods everywhere. All kinds of false idols. Probably the case is they don't believe in absolutes. They kind of just go on what they think.
You get that shrine to the unknown God.
Yeah.
It's like, whatever anyone else comes up with, this is the shrine to that one. Like,
exactly.
You see that in their religion, of course, the society and accepting whatever you want. And then it's just society in general.
And notice this very profound statement. It says in verse 30, these times of ignorance. Now, he's been talking about the ignorance of God's nature. They don't understand God's nature. This isn't really talking about, well, back in the Old Testament, they didn't know what sin was, so God overlooked sin. I don't think that's the context.
Even Cain knew it was it
was sinful to murder.
Yeah.
So I think he's talking about the times that people did not understand the nature of God. God overlooked that. He's like, look, I get it. But it says in verse number 30, but now under the New Testament, he commands all men everywhere to repent. Why? Why should we go to Jesus? Why should we go to God? Why should we believe in absolute truth? Because he has appointed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by the man, the truth, the one who is the absolute truth, whom he has ordained, and has given us assurance of this to all by raising him from the dead. So we have an absolute standard by which we are going to be judged. Somebody who's going to set out this law system, which he's already set out, and says, follow that. You follow that, you're going to be fine. Mm-hmm. And I have not found a miserable life so far in following what Jesus says. Now, I mean in a sense of conscience, in a sense of self-satisfaction, if I'm wording that right. I'm knowing I'm doing these things. I know the truth. I know I'm doing right. And it brings me blessings. You're going to go through hard times.
Yeah. But it's a simple life, but not an easy one.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. It's not going to be easy going through the absolute. Mm-hmm. And that's where we can find absolute truth. It's only in God's word. If you're struggling with that as a Christian, know that Jesus is talking here to us and telling us you can actually know the truth. He doesn't want us all divided. He doesn't want us groping around in the dark, hoping we know. He actually tells us we can know. And if you're an atheist, if you're an agnostic, think about the things we've talked about today. And I'll put out the information at the end of this episode on how to contact me. But Mitchell, you got anything else to say before we finish this?
I I think we touched everything.
Yeah, I probably should stop before I just start digressing and getting off at anything. Well,
I love that word, like righteousness. There, it's kind of one you overlook. It's like, oh yeah, whatever, be good.
mm-hmm.
But then, like, you think he will judge the world in righteousness, and righteousness is a good word to put on top of the objective truth.
That is true.
Because I mean, like, it's just the essence of being right, being good.
Yeah,
and not even just being like good to your neighbor. It's just what is objectively right as a concept. And I've always, I don't know, I found a newfound appreciation for that word, I guess.
Yeah. And that's the thing that we need to think about every day, being righteous, because we're going to have that absolute. We're going to stand before the judgment throne of God one day, and he's going to judge us through Christ. Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's all I have. I appreciate you being with me today on the show.
My pleasure.
Thank you today for being with us on a Study in Truth podcast. Hope you have a great day. Thanks again for listening. If you need to reach out to us, please email us at astudyintruth92@gmail.com or call us at 423-946-4515.